Up? Today we've got Demani Felder. If you do not know who Demani is, then you clearly did not see the amazing viral video that he put out this week. It's incredible. He really gave it to the Democrats in a way that I haven't seen somebody do in a very long time, just chastising them for the fact that they've lied, they've concealed the truth about their racism, and they haven't done anything for the Black community in America in a very, very, very long time. So welcome, Demani, to the show. Thank you for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. So by the way, viewers, if Demani's looking down at all, he's retweeting the show real quick, so he's not ignoring us. And same here on this end. We're so excited to have you today because that video, when I watched it, I think that there's this sort of idea that there's a silent majority. And I think that too many people have gotten comfortable with the idea of a silent majority. And I personally have a little bit of an issue with that because I feel like silence doesn't inspire people. Silence doesn't give people permission and it doesn't open a door for them. Silence sort of tends to make people feel like they're alone. And so that's been my issue with sort of the phrase silent majority. I think that we're at the point in history and we're on the precipice of sort of an intellectual and cultural civil war that requires us to speak up and requires us not to be silent. And that's why your video meant a lot to me, because you have sort of the same energy that we're trying to bring in terms of really being culture warriors and being out there and saying, no, you know what, this is the way it's been is not the way it has to be. And the way that the left is trying to take us is not the direction that we need to go. There is another way, there is another path. And that's why your video meant a lot. So my question to you is, do you think that the idea of a silent majority is a healthy thing for us to sort of depend on?
Well, Robbie, it used to be, and conservatives for a very long time now, for as long as I can remember, have been known as the party that will take the high road. They're not going to get down in the mud, for lack of a better term, and they're going to show up at the polls when it actually counts. But we've seen the outcries for everything that goes against what our values are continue to escalate on the left-hand side of the aisle. So it is incumbent upon any true conservative now more than ever to be willing to add their voice to the fray and speak out and actually not allow this counterculture of liberalism to completely railroad us. We're at a point now where we're very close to that point of no return as far as the country is concerned. And it doesn't matter what country you are throughout history, countries have risen and grown and risen to power, and countries have fallen as well. And I think it's important that we do not allow the bread and circuses mentality that befell the Romans of old to befall us here in the homeland at this point. These are trying times. That there is a lot that I never thought I would see even in the next 10 years that is happening this year. So knowing that the end game for the left is nothing more than overt and abject authoritarianism, for me, my thought process was a few years ago when I started actually being more vocal on social media, it was just, I need to do something. I can't just stand by and let this go on. There's a saying, good times create weak men. I think we've enjoyed good times as a country for a very long time, but now we're at a point where the weak men are being manifested. We're seeing it everywhere, but the weak men are allied with very powerful people on the left, and they're being used more or less as pawns at this point. But they're willing to do the nefarious bidding of George Soros or anyone else at the top on the left-hand side of the aisle. And it's important that we don't allow them to just run over us unchecked.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think one of the other things that gets lost in sort of the idea of politics when you look at polling and the general support the Democratic Party has received from minority communities is the fact that minority communities are actually much more conservative than people would assume by the polling on who they vote for. I know, me being Hispanic, the Hispanic community is very pro-life, they're very family values driven, and the voting reflects that a little bit more than it does, with Black Americans. But same thing with Black Americans. Don't you agree that the values that are inherently healthy and strong in your community are ones that are more conservative?
Absolutely, which is why it's all the more disquieting to see too many people in my demographic vote specifically against their own self-interest, honestly, just for lack of doing their own research to begin with. That there's so much information. We live in a beautiful information age where we have all the answers to all the questions you could ever want, literally in the palm of your hand, but it's up to you as an individual to seek out those right answers and not to fall for the easy lies that are being spread by the left. The left has done a very good job over the last several decades of masquerading as the benefactors for the minority communities. And what's unfortunate is seeing so many people who do look like me, and even people who are Hispanic as well, being played as if they're just, bystanders to be used at will, and not actively being listened to by the politicians who demand their vote at all times. And what's more interesting, though, is the reactions within my community and the Hispanic community for anyone who dares to flout or go against what is deemed to be the conventional wisdom for that demographic, which is very insulting. When you look at the history of African Americans, we are a resilient people. Hispanic people are resilient, resourceful people. So to be relegated to this role where politicians, in the back of their minds, they already think that they know how you're going to vote based off of your immutable characteristics, things you did not choose yourself. To me, that's a slap in the face, and it should be a slap in the face to anyone. Everyone should be willing to first start with the individual, understand what they themselves as individuals think about the issues, and then find the politicians that are more in line with those views. Not start at the very top and then trickle your way back down. It's counterproductive.
Right. I find that so, the most enraging thing for me to witness on the left is the blatant hypocrisy when it comes to, being an anti-racism activist or advocate, or an ally, that they won't call out the racism that happens every day right in front of them. The suppression of Black voices that are conservative, or Hispanic voices, any minority that doesn't align with the Democratic Party is marginalized, is suppressed, is silenced, and called a litany of racist names. And this is happening every day. So I tell anybody who says, what are you doing? I say, well, I'm defending my Black friends who are being suppressed and who are called horrible racist names. Maybe you can join if that's what you want to do. Step up for the, to do the anti-racist work. If you really care about everybody. If you really care about all Black lives matter.
Because I have to be honest, I have not always been a Republican. I became a Republican after 2008, after we had our first child, because that's when I really started to dive deep on politics and dive deep on the issues and figure out, who agreed with what I felt was right. And that's how I figured out I was a Republican. And I had never received any sort of racism from Republicans for being the son of a Cuban immigrant, for being Hispanic, nothing. I had never heard anything that I found offensive or racist. The views on border security or anything like the immigration, I never found it offensive. I never found it to be racially driven because, honestly, the idea from the left that if you talk about immigration, you're only talking about Hispanic people is what I find racist, because there's immigrants from all over the world. But beyond that, I think that this idea that, race has to be that frontline characteristic that defines who we are is in itself really racist.
Right. Yeah. And that was my question was, what have you experienced as far as being silenced or being discriminated against for being a Black conservative?
Yeah, well, I started finding my political voice as early as 2012 myself. 2012, 2013, actually. I didn't really start feeling emboldened to speak on social media until about 2015. So, as time went on, I started noticing one thing, because yes, I have received plenty of vitriol myself, unfortunately, from majority of the time people who do look like me, but also from some very bold, very brash white liberals who feel like they have a right to tell me what to think at the same time. So what I've experienced, though, and what I really started to realize was after the first few insults I started to get, which really did sting a bit at first, was I started hearing the same things repeated over and over again. And I was like, okay, well, if all you're going to do is call me one of 5 or 6 names that you have in your little verbal word bank up there, if that's all you got for me, if there's nothing else I can expect from you, then that's easy. You've already lost at that point. Because at that point, I control the conversation based off of what I'm bringing to the conversation. And the minute someone begins to hurl pejoratives or dysphonisms at you as a person and not at your argument, that's how you know that their argument is coming completely undone. So that's my indicator of how to best handle that, because it does intensify as you are blessed to grow. Obviously, it does continue to ramp up as well. But what I also was struck by was not just the hatred that I received from my own demographic and from others as well, but it started to seem like for every hateful message, I would get an encouraging message from a complete stranger who had found my page or my profile, whatever, and was encouraging me. And when I realized that, I'm like, if this is a one-to-one exchange for someone who's going to hurl racist pejoratives my way and someone who's going to build me up, I can handle that as well. So I think the beauty of social media, even though it is being used to actively censor, silence, and suppress many conservative voices, is that it has allowed us to have the opportunity to actually connect with people who are like-minded in whatever way we can, and then draw strength from each other.
Right.
Yep.
Tell us what your journey was. I mean, have you always been a conservative? And, you said you found your voice in around 2012. I mean, what was your upbringing like? Where did these ideas come from?
Yeah, so both of my parents are conservatives. They're Republicans. They're members of the NRA. They both are packing heat. So we always knew we were safe. We were going out with them. But what I'm most grateful for is that they did not actively foist the political dialogue onto the children. We knew where they stood, and every 2 or 4 years we would watch debates and political events, but not really quite understand the ins and outs of the entire process. So for me, as it is for many people, that mental coming of age, if you will, or ideological coming of age happened when I was at school at Texas A&M University. I graduated from there in 2014, but it was in 2013 when I was actually up in Dallas, Texas for an internship for a company I was in line to work for. That was when the trial for the George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin incident was going on. And I, because I was in college and not quite still all there, I was not aware that HLN, Headline News, that channel, was a subsidiary of CNN. So I was getting a lot of my information from, at the time, Dr. Drew, I believe, Nancy Grace, and a few others. And what I realized, let me back up a little bit, actually. So I was watching the trial, and then the verdict came down that Zimmerman was not guilty of the charges that had been levied against him. And immediately I, at like a petulant 21-year-old, jumped on social media and said, this is what it's like being a black man in America. There's no justice. I can't believe this decision happened. This is just another example, blah, blah, blah. But I'm grateful that God put people in my path who took it upon themselves to reach out to me via comments or private messages to say, hey, have you read this article? Have you looked at the autopsy report? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? And instead of shutting them down immediately, what I did was I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give it a look just to see what they're talking about so I could refute their argument. That was what my thought process was. And the more research I did, the more I realized how completely misled I had been by the mainstream media. And to me, I took that as a personal offense because I pride myself. I was homeschooled all 12 years. My mom is a saint. I'm second oldest of 9 kids. She's still homeschooling today. I pride myself on being able to accurately diagnose and understand situations, and realizing how easy it was for the mainstream media to mislead me. Really, I took that as a personal affront. So from that day forward, I realized I cannot trust everything that I see on mainstream media. I need to figure out what the best sources are going to be, and then be willing to fact check even those sources at the same time. So ever since 2013 was when the wheel started turning. And then that led us to 2015, where I was actively able to engage in and pay attention to the whole electoral process, because I was not really aware of what a primary was. I wasn't familiar with the concepts of all the different debates that were going on. So I had to take some time to sit down and become a student and understand how this political process worked. And then that brings me to the current day where I'm at. 5 years ago, I should say I was a watcher. Now I feel like I'm a player in the game, trying to help fight for the soul of the country, because there's no more time to waste.
Right. I think that's fascinating that you were homeschooled, because I see a difference in kids who are homeschooled as far as how they think. Their critical thinking abilities, in my opinion, are superior to that of the modern education system, the government schools, even private schools. I think there's a culture shift happening, and more parents are waking up, from the COVID, from paying attention to Zoom sessions to, and just the indoctrination that's been happening, politicization of education. What can you say to that? I mean, do you think that had a profound impact as far as how you think and your education, the quality of your education, and how do you think it's going to impact kids today? I mean, positively or negatively?
Absolutely. Being able to be raised and taught by parents simultaneously, for me, I can't say enough good things about it. I realize it's not feasible for everyone, but what it allows parents who can do it to do is to not just teach their children what they need to know, but then also train them up in the way they should go. to instill those Christian values, in my case, those Christian values that become the bedrock and the foundation of who you are as a person and how you view the world around you. And I think a lot of parents did get somewhat of a rude awakening with COVID-19, where their kids were home and they had to become more active players in their kids' education process and less just bystanders who were relying on the government themselves to instill whatever knowledge they wanted into the children. And that really goes to show you, though, that the government, and unfortunately now the liberal side of the aisle, they have a death grip on the youth of America, and they have a death grip on them all the way through school, all the way up through college. So by the time they come out of college, their minds are completely warped. So for me, as far as homeschooling is concerned, I think it's something that hopefully more parents will start to take a look at least and realize what the pros are. There are some cons as well. They can require a lot more work, but I think the end result is what should be most focused on in this case. Because when you have a young person who is being, in this case, just indoctrinated in the public school system, which we know has a extreme far left bent, there's no other outcome other than the loss of one's ability to think critically. And I think that critical thinking and the ability to engage in civil discourse is what could possibly help to save this country if more people start actually engaging in those two activities.
Definitely.
Yeah, we experienced a lot of this ourselves in our own life. We have 3 kids, and we went through this whole thing, and our kids went to private school. And as we started to listen in on some of the things, especially our oldest was being taught, we were pretty surprised because these are not things that are in the curriculum. They're not things that were supposed to be taught, and they're not things that are based in fact. For instance, our oldest daughter was taught that Jews were not in Israel first, but that Palestinians and Muslims were. And even Palestinians and Muslims don't claim to have been in Israel first. Everybody's aware of the fact that Judaism was a religion before Islam. So these things are not things you can really argue about. They're just historical facts. But they were teaching them something that was just totally made up, So my daughter, even she came out and was like, hey, that's not actually historically accurate, and had to teach the teacher what reality really was. And, you have to wonder as a parent if those things are an accident or if they're purposeful sort of bending of the conversation towards a specific narrative, because the narrative that was being spun was one that was of sympathy towards Palestine and against the Jewish people in Israel. So, you have to wonder about those things. And it led us to our own conclusion that it was not the right place for our daughter, among other things that happened. Many other things. Sure. And they all engage in politics. Like, for instance, the Spanish teacher had a poster of Che Guevara, and having a Cuban dad. I think my daughter found that pretty bizarre and disturbing, that somebody who she'd been taught all her life led the slaughter of innocent Cubans was sitting in her Spanish classroom on a wall like he was a hero. And those things, parents are paying for. So I just, I posted something the other day about a school here in Nashville, and Laura Ingram picked it up and ended up putting it on her show and talking about it. It's called Harpeth Hall, and it's actually a school close to Nashville, and they have majority Republican parents at this school. Okay. They put out a release this week that they are no longer celebrating George Washington Day, which had been a long-term celebration that they had done at the school every year. And it was to sort of honor the, foundations of our country and learn about the founders and learn about sort of the beginnings and everything. And it wasn't just about George Washington, but they're canceling the whole thing because they say that it's not inclusive towards women. It's not inclusive towards people of color. It's not inclusive towards their LGBT community, blah, 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 blah. So they have, all of the virtue signaling, all the wokeness, and too many parents are blind to this. So what do we do to wake parents up and say, hey, stop sticking money in the pockets of cultural Marxists who want to destroy our children? Because if we allow this to happen, the next generation is going to be lost.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think even for parents who don't have the luxury of private or homeschool, that it's going to require very intensive and very intentional, almost re-education, if you will, where you equip your children, your youth, with the knowledge that they will need to fully understand what the facts are, so they're not only getting to one side force-fed them every single day. And so that if they do have to engage in a debate with someone, they do so from a standpoint of facts and not feelings. We live in a culture now that is completely driven by the emotional moment of the day. Wherever the breeze is blowing, that's how people's emotions are at that time. So if you're able to equip someone, and so sometimes people are like, how do you do it? How do you speak or present what you have to say? And the thing is, when you're not operating from a standpoint of emotion, and when you're confident in what your facts are and you know they're right, that gives you almost a virtual safety blanket, if you will, from a mental standpoint, where you're like, I know that the facts I'm presenting are true. So there's no need for me to engage in a shouting match with someone. I can let them show themselves to be the intolerant and hateful people and misinformed people that they are. And then I can present myself in a way that's going to not only, present my side in a manner that's going to be more palatable, but also hopefully point people to the Lord Jesus Christ. In my case, that's something that I think very strongly about is leading by example and being able to be that light that people need to see in the world.
Yep, we always tell people that if you're getting into a debate or you're talking to someone, whether it's online or in person, our job is to be the sane ones. Let the left be crazy, because those people in the middle, the people who are truly movable in one direction or the other, they're looking for who's sane. They're not looking for who's crazy. Nobody ever goes into, any sort of decision in life going, hey, where's the craziest person? I would like to do whatever they're doing. The people who are really sensible, people that want to live a nice life, they're looking for sanity. They're looking for reason. And the more we can be a beacon of those things, the more popular and the stronger we're going to be. So to shift gears a little bit, I want to get into sort of the roots of your viral video. What can you tell our audience about what the Democratic Party has done to conceal who they really are? And beyond that, what they've failed to do for the Black community in America?
Yes, the Democratic Party has a very well-documented history of standing against the acquisition of civil rights, not just for African Americans, but for other minorities as well. In the video, I talked about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, where I believe there was only 19 of the 82 Democrats who voted in favor of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And then obviously there was no record of support for the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, which gave us the right to vote. And those are just three examples. But when you go further to history, you realize how much they undid, how much progress they undid, because there's a gap of about 100 years of African-American advancement from a historical perspective in the political forum. And that's from about 1860 to 1960, actually. And what people don't realize is that back even in the mid to late 1800s, there were a lot of movers and shakers who were African Americans, who were former slaves, who were in positions of power on the Republican side of the aisle. The Republican Party was founded, and some of the main pillars of the Republican Party were founded specifically to eradicate the notion of slavery. The first, the Black people who were the first ones to preside over the Republican conventions and all, those were Black as well. But then what happened was, between the 1860s and 1960s, when the Democratic Party retook control of the legislature in general, what they did was they were able to start enacting these restrictive and reductive policies that actively suppressed and undid all the progress that we had made in the African American community. And that progress was halted effectively for an entire century until the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act was finally passed. So when you know all that information, you realize these people have not always been on my side. And for people who say the party always switched, and so now the Democrats are for minorities and Black people. And my question is, okay, well, where's the proof to that assertion? Where is that proof? Because I'm seeing too many people in the minority community either stay at this level of disadvantage or sink even further therein. So you have to start asking those tough questions. Is, if the Democratic Party says that they are for me, why am I always needing them for something? Why is that always the chief pillar of what they run on when they go to the Black community and ask for the vote every 2 or 4 years? Why is it that they need me as a minority to be in a state of disadvantage or a state of perpetual need in order for them to come and be my magical saviors who are going to save the day if I just vote for them? It doesn't make sense after a while. It's akin to, if the parties did switch, that's akin to saying, oh yeah, well, my ex-girlfriend tried to kill me in the past, but then she said she changed, so now I'm going to believe her. It doesn't make sense. It's disingenuous and hypocritical to the core.
Yep. You know what I always tell people too, if you hear this argument that the parties switched, ask one question. It takes one question. Say, okay, can you give me a list of politicians who changed parties?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a very short list. It's like 3 people. And those 3 people did not change party because of anything having to do with slavery. So, you know, it's a disingenuous sort of excuse that the Democrats like to use. And it's built on a foundation of nothing because there's literally no proof that the party switched.
Right.
You know, I think that's something that we really have to help dispel and arm people with, you know, sort of answers like that. Hey, just ask them the question. Ask them who switched. Who switched? I'd love to learn more about it, you know, and let them make a fool of themselves because they can't answer that question, you know, and inevitably they'll go to ad hominem and they, you know, they'll start attacking your character or they'll attack the Republican Party. They change the subject. That's where they'll eventually go.
And for the party switch, the real question is, why would they? How much sense does that make for a party that actively? So basically, saying the party switched is tacitly acknowledging the sordid history of the Democratic Party. But then to say the parties did switch, then you're saying, okay, so then immediately one day they said, let's just flip a switch, and now we're going to be for the people we were trying to oppress. That doesn't make sense either.
Exactly.
But we have to start using our brains.
Super logical.
It was the beginning of the doubling down. That's a consistent even today. You know, one thing that I noticed that I'm just so offended by, and I'm not Black, but it really offends me, is every time a Democrat talks about, you know, a minority, it's in the most like victim derogatory, beneath terms. And I feel like I'm the only one going, does anybody else hear this?
Yep.
I mean, how do they get away with this? You know, why do people not speak up more when they hear them speaking this way? I never hear Democrats saying, wow, look at these incredible people. They've done this. They're you know, other than Martin Luther King, which apparently
he was kind of in the middle. You know, he went from Republican to Democrat to, you know, nobody really knows what he voted. But
I don't see any Democrats uplifting or empowering or referring to anybody who's a minority in, you know, empowering terms. I mean, am I wrong about that, or am I missing something there?
No, you can't. Oh, and first things first, you said you weren't Black. Well, according to Joe Biden, I'm not Black either. So yeah, we have that in common. But no, I think with the Democratic Party as a whole, you can't claim to be empowering the minority community by constantly telling them they're oppressed. Because when you reinforce the argument that you are oppressed, that is going to plant nothing but seeds of bitterness, resentment, and a desire for revenge and retribution. And when the Democrats faithfully water those seeds, we're seeing the fruits of their labor really manifest themselves on our streets today with this violent, rioting, anarchist behavior that has just proliferated and spread across the entire country as a whole. And so for the left, the thing for them, and for a lot of the entertainers who are aligned with them at the same time, is there is this constant need to reinforce and really hammer it into everyone's head that you need to hate the police, you need to hate white people, you need to always never be thankful for what you have, but always blame someone else for why you don't have what you want. You need to shirk any pretense of personal accountability and responsibility. You are allowed to languish in a state of financial disrepair, because for them, that is their lifeline. That is their job security. So if they can keep you needing them for something every 2 or 4 years, they're set. That's the reason that Maxine Waters, Reverend Al Sharpton, and many other people have made so much money by being poverty pimps, if you will. That's all they do, is they talk about how rough and how terrible things are. And there's some of the prime examples of the totality of the American dream. So it should be insulting to anyone who is able to think logically as to why the minute the Democratic Party pivots to minority groups, the first thing they're talking about is how they're sorry for how bad they have it and that they want to help. At the end of the day, you know, no one should want to always be looking for a handout. And America is called the land of opportunity for a reason. There's a plethora of opportunities out there for anyone, specifically for minorities. There are so many minority scholarships and financial aid avenues that you can apply for, but you have to actually reach out instead of like looking for a handout and reach out for a hand up and apply for those scholarships. You know, get that first job, work that first job, prove yourself, then you move up to the next level. That's how it's supposed to work. But in this culture of instant gratification that we have now, we want everything right now. We don't want to have to work for anything. I want it, actually, no, I want it yesterday. That's the mentality that we have, and that's really been perpetuated throughout the youth, throughout Gen Z, as we're seeing now, is everything needs to be at a moment's notice. So I'm not sure if that has some sort of correlation with this whole culture of convenience where anything can be delivered to you in 2 days. You can like pick things up and buy it right then and there. But it really is a problem in the country when people are so much chomping at the bit to get something immediately that they don't really understand what it takes to get that thing in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that having personal accountability is a hard button. You know, we live in the convenient society where everything wants to be swipe culture. And I think that it takes critical thinking and self-reflection to be able to look at your life and your decisions and say, how can I do better? You know, and instead of constantly looking out, what can somebody else do for me? What can I do for myself? It's a different mindset entirely. And when you are constantly being indoctrinated with this ideology of, you know, you're the victim, you know, you're in this situation because A, B, and C, it's really hard to break out of that, you know, which is brings me back to the education, you know, system. You know, they teach a lot of this ideology and they bake it into the lessons. And they bake it in with identity politics. Have you had any experiences with identity politics, like good or bad? I mean, what can you share with us about your experience with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The YouTube channel that I and my older brother started, our tagline and motto is "Identity politics is dead," and that's an aspirational statement because we're hoping to eradicate that at some point. And we dream for a world where identity politics is not the specter that it is today, because
Right.
the concept of it is so distasteful to think that any individual can look at someone else and by virtue of those immutable characteristics, be that your skin color, be that your gender, and there are only two, by the way, those metrics, and think that by those metrics alone, that is all that you use to determine who you give your political support to.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I checked, we all had brains, we all have different thoughts. There are no two people in this world who are alike. And unfortunately, we have more and more people who are willing to just sign on to the hive-minded groupthink mentality and not become that true individual. When you think about everything that our ancestors, when I think about everything that our ancestors went through in the past, for me, I think that I honor them by thinking critically and making people earn my vote. I think I honor them because they are the ones who really did sacrifice and really did go through horrible atrocities during the civil rights era. And they suffered through all that. You know, my ancestors getting cigarettes put out on their skin, getting violently assaulted just for sitting at a lunch counter. They didn't do that so that 60 years later, everyone who looked like them would just do whatever a certain political party said. They were fighting for the right to vote, and the right to vote means you have a choice, but it's up to you to exercise that choice. For me personally, I've got people all the time who are like, why are you supporting the Republicans? And they have the same arguments. And for me, it's so easy now because I've heard it all before, and I know how to best diffuse those arguments and destroy those arguments because I know what the correct answers are to the questions that they ask. And when I answer those questions so directly, I think part of the reason why the video you mentioned did so well and performed so well online is just because I do my best to not beat around or filibuster any certain topic. I'm going to hit you between the eyes with the facts. It's going to sting. It's going to hurt a little bit, but it's going to save you some time, and you're going to have to come away from that and actually take some time to digest what I actually said. So for me, that's my experience with identity politics. It's not going anywhere, unfortunately, but I do hope that as more and more people start to speak out and doing things like what y'all are doing, that it will lead to a culture where people don't start at the top of the ticket, but where people first start by looking at themselves and saying, what do I believe? What are my values? What are the things I care about? And then using that as the baseline for what party they're going to support in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, that is something I'm so passionate about as well, that identity politics and education is the biggest assault on character development in our children. It teaches them to see kids and to attribute immutable characteristics to them. And also it it's an uneven consequence system. And that's really a measure of equality, is how we measure justice. But when kids start seeing different consequences, there's democratic policies that make behavior modifications and allowances if you have a certain skin color. And when kids start seeing that breeds racism. It breeds resentment. It breeds intolerance, because kids start realizing we're not the same. So that the identity politics that's been injected into schools affects their character, it affects their soul, it affects their heart and their ability to see each other as individuals. So I feel like that is equally as just toxic as the educational element of what they're learning and the flawed history and all of that.
And the biggest thing too is for the left, they can't say that they're the party of diversity and the party for diversity, but then expect everyone on their side to think exactly the same. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, our oldest, it reminds me of, our oldest went to a school that literally only would allow one viewpoint.
View. Yeah.
And we offered to bring a minority speaker on.
I offered to bring Candace Owens. I offered to bring all kinds of people because they literally
of color that had a different ideology.
So at her old school in California, we moved to Tennessee last year in July, and in California at her old school, they actually had a white liberal dude come who has organized Antifa rallies, come and explain white privilege to the kids. This is at one of the most expensive private schools in California, filled with celebrity kids. They had an actual Antifa organizer come to the school. He has organized Antifa rallies. I can't stress that enough. Come to the school and explain white privilege to kids. And when he did, he explained to them that white children should no longer sit alone with each other. There should always be a minority present, because if there's not, minorities will not feel welcome to be your friend. So you have to make sure before you sit down that you're with at least one minority. Okay. And my daughter comes home and she's like, Dad, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Like, should I do that? Like, should I make sure that there's somebody? And I was like, no, do what we've taught you your whole life. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Be friends with the people who are the kindest to you, that are the most fun to be around. And whatever they look like, it doesn't matter if they're the most beautiful person in the world or not, or if they're this color or that color, or they were born in this country or that country. Reflect on who they are as a person. Those,
Yes.
Be with the people who treat you the way you want to be treated.
Right.
And I told her, and as a bonus, you're part Cuban, so you can sit wherever you want. And whenever you're around your friends, you'd be like, hey, I'll be your token minority. Because that's basically what they're saying, is that they want us to feel like, here's the thing. If I was there at that speech, and as somebody, who could be Hispanic, I'd be like, so are my friends now with me because they want to be, or because they're supposed to have somebody who's not fully white with them?
Yes.
You'd have to wonder those things. And that's the world they're creating, is one where you don't really know if your accomplishments are your accomplishments, or if they're part of this system they're creating that says you have to do this or else you're going to be punished. You have to think this way or you're going to have a problem, because at the end of the day, too many people just don't want to get canceled. So they'll do what they think is going to keep them from getting canceled. But the truth is, this inquisition will never stop. I compare the left all the time to a religion, because they're behaving like they want a theocracy. And, they sort of bow down to wokeness. And the truth is, it will never end. These people are perpetually offended. They'll continue to be perpetually offended. And if your goal in life is to please them so that the mob doesn't come for you, it's going to come for you anyways. So you're better off just standing up for what you believe in.
Yes, absolutely right. The quota culture will be the death of us, because it will also start to, like you said earlier, you have to start asking those tough questions. Let's say you get into a great school, and let's say you're really proud of that, but then you realize that the university has to have 2 black kids for every white kid. Then you wonder, did I really even earn? Did I get here because of my own merit, or because someone felt bad for me? So either way you slice it, that could even contribute to you having feelings of resentment as well, if you find out that maybe you weren't supposed to be there in the first place. So it's a vicious circular loop that you get stuck in, where you're always feeling oppressed, but then when the left tries to make you feel better about yourself, even then, in a sense, they are diminishing what you bring to the table, because they don't have you rise to the same standards as anybody else. So at the end, the only people they're hurting are themselves.
Right.
Yep.
And then the people who worked just as hard or harder, are cast aside for these, ambiguous diversity checkpoints.
I mean,
you know?
and if anybody has any sort of like fascination this isn't happening, just look at every, major Ivy League school and the way, especially Harvard, the way they've treated Asian American students. They've treated Asian American students totally differently from white students, black students, Hispanic students. In many cases, a lot of these kids that are getting denied have higher test scores, higher grades, did more extracurricular activities, but Harvard instituted a personality part of their, admissions process where they've said, oh, well, these other people outperformed in that aspect, despite the fact that, you have on paper, these candidates are outperforming in every other area. It's just disingenuous, and I would wonder if I got into Harvard, I would wonder if that was why, because they needed a quota. They needed to check off, we have this many Hispanic people, because at the end of the day, that's what they care about. They don't want to get in trouble with the media. They're, again, cowering to a mob. Mm-hmm. So, I think that what they're building, I know it is so destructive. And it's why people like us have to stand up and speak out at whatever cost it ends up being, because if we don't, the future we're leaving for our kids is one that is extraordinarily scary.
Absolutely.
Do you want to do the viewer questions?
Yeah. Unless you have a comment. Did you have a comment?
No. I was just going to co-sign everything Robbie said. It's of paramount importance that we reestablish and start championing that personal accountability. And if you have worked hard, you should be privy to all the accoutrements that provides. But if you haven't, what you have to do is start looking in that mirror and taking that finger you're pointing at somebody else and pointing at yourself and figure out, what can I do better? What should I do better? How can I improve and move forward to make the best of myself that I can be?
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So we have a couple viewer questions before we let you go. David asks, what's being done by people who hold your beliefs to get the word out and wake up, who believe the Democratic Party for decades? Why is there such loyalty to the Democrats still in minority communities?
The best way I can describe it is Stockholm Syndrome. After a while, I feel like a lot of minorities have become so accustomed to hearing the same things that they no longer think they even have the right to question it, which is the real shame of it all. So I think a lot of people, for lack of a better term, are just, they are creatures of habit. And when you've been doing the same thing over and over again, I remember back during the 2012 election, actually, it was the first one I could vote in. I was talking to somebody and I was asking, who are you going to vote for? And they're like, oh, I'm going to vote for Barack Obama. And I was like, really? And they was like, yeah. And I was like, why? And then they said, well, my whole family's voting for Barack Obama, so I'm going to vote for them too. And I was like, that's a pretty bad reason to have. But that's the status quo now. So as far as what's being done to wake people up, one of the most rewarding things, I'm sure y'all are familiar with as well, is the fact that the more outspoken you are, it seems, the more people you come in contact with. When I first started speaking out, I would maybe get, maybe 10 or 15 likes and a bunch of mean comments on a post. But then over time, now I've built this network, and we've all built networks where we know from coast to coast there are people who agree with us and who will support us and lift us up and encourage each other. So I think it's important just to start where you are, start somewhere, and add your voice to this chorus of patriotism that is sweeping across the country. It's very important.
Absolutely. I said, from my experience, I wasn't brave at the beginning. It's just I decided to make the decision to speak truth. And the more truth you speak, ironically, the braver you get. And then the braver you get, the more truth you speak. So it's a great cycle. Sometimes you just have to stand for truth, even if your legs are shaking, right?
Absolutely.
So Sarah asked, I'd like to know who inspired you to be an independent thinking man. Was it someone in your life or an event?
That's actually a good question. I haven't really thought about that. The best way I can say, though, is both of my parents are the first in their family to go to college themselves, to graduate. They both got master's degrees. My dad got a PhD a few years ago. So really, for me, what inspired me was their work ethic. and their perseverance and determination. And like I said before, I'm a second oldest of 9 kids. So seeing the way that they were able to handle themselves with grace, still provide us, with the best upbringing that they could. For me, that's where I draw my inspiration from. It's just seeing that example that they set from the standpoint of just always pushing forward, not making excuses for yourself, and taking it upon yourself to make the most of yourself. I think that for me, just their leadership is what's been my biggest inspiration.
That's wonderful.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
It was great to have you on today. You're an awesome guy. Keep doing what you're doing. Where can people find you and
Support
see
you.
more of what you're doing, support you in general?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I love talking. That's what I do. But people who are interested in hearing more, you can find me at Facebook at Demani Felder, or Demani Bryant Felder, that is. Find me on TikTok, Instagram, and so many social media sites. TikTok and Instagram is at the Demani Felder. Twitter is at the Demani Felder as well. And then on YouTube, me and my older brother, we have a channel called The Rights Brothers. It's RIGHT Brothers. That's where you can find more of my thoughts. But again, I want to thank you all for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay encouraged. We'll get through this together, and we'll do everything we can to keep making America great.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely.
Have a great day, and enjoy the. You're going to a movie premiere tonight, right?
Yeah, the movie premiere for the Uncle Tom movie. Anyone who's interested, go to uncletom.com to see that. And then tomorrow, I'll be getting up bright and early to go up to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to go to that Trump rally. So if you're out there, if you're watching, you're going to be out there, look for me. I'll be there. I'm pretty hard to miss.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day. Thank you, brother.
You too.
Bye, Demani.
Bye-bye. So thank you guys for joining us today. Next week's going to be a big week. We have the I Am Republican campaign coming out, and look forward to sharing with all of you guys.
Definitely. Thank you guys. I hope you have a great weekend. Unplug, spend time with your family, get away from the craziness, and don't forget to fill your own cup to get back into this on Monday. And love you guys. Bye.